Good morning. This is Tracy Hales Vass with Right on Four Corners on KSJE 90.9 FM. Today I have the pleasure of talking with Elizabeth Jacobson, the Poet Laureate of Santa Fe, an award-winning author of Not Into the Blossoms and Not Into the Air. Good morning, Elizabeth.
Hi, Tracy. How are you?
I'm great. I really enjoyed your poetry.
Thank you so much, and thank you for thinking of interviewing me. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, you're the Poet Laureate of Santa Fe. I mean, I can't ignore that at all.
Oh, well.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And your poetry, I've been thinking for the last couple of days on how to find a word for it, and I haven't yet, but it's the opposite of sweet. It's so real. It's life in all its phases, including death.
Oh, well, that's a really nice compliment. I appreciate that. I mean, I think it's based in observation,
right?
And that's kind of my sort of how I work, and so then it opens up from that.
I can see that it's very gut level.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah, it sticks with you. So I enjoyed that. So how is this a latest collection, or is it a compilation? Or tell me a little bit about Not Into Blossoms and Not Into the Air.
Okay, sure. It was published in January of 2019. It won the New Measure Poetry Prize from New Measure from Parlor Press, and it was published. It's a series, the New Measure Poetry Prize. Every year they pick a winner, and then several other books that they're going to publish along with the winner. And it also won the 2019 New Mexico Arizona Book Award for Best Poetry Book and Best New Mexico Book of 2019.
Right.
So that was exciting.
Yes, both of them.
Yeah. So, well, I think generally the title is a double negation: Not Into the Blossoms and Not Into the Air.
Right.
And that title is a phrase from a poem by Larry Levis called Threshold of the Oblivious Blossoming, which is from his last book called The Darkening Trapeze. And for me, that phrase and how I've used it in my title is an abstraction of the Zen concept of form and emptiness.
Mm-hmm.
And, in that all things are both empty and full, and that nothing tethers us to the earth, yet at the same time, everything does. And the Levis line, the full line, is desire rushed back into things, but not into the blossoms and not into the air. And so for me, much of this book is about desire and to see the momentum, the vitality in things, to observe closely the world and understanding that as a human, I'm not separate from anything, that in fact there is no natural world, there is simply the world,
mm-hmm.
and everything is included, in that, as we're seeing now with the pandemic.
Right.
Nothing is functioning alone, and anyway, that's the sort of the main, I think, sense or expression that I have in the title, that I use the title for, that goes throughout the book. Another main premise of the book is the fact of impermanence.
Right.
And the paradox of how we search for and perhaps discover some constancy in what feels like a rug being pulled out from under our feet.
Yes.
So for me, like I already said, the response to this is close observation. And that really helps me to be cognizant from my experiences. Like when I'm paying attention to the fluctuations in the day, moment to moment, watching what other creatures are doing in their moment, it really slows things down for me. And
mm-hmm.
I feel so grateful for that experience. And then there's this sense of contentment, connection, and intimacy that comes with that. So I hope the poems portray this, and the joy and the love, that comes across, I think, thematically in a lot of the poems, as well as the dark sides of life.
Right. And the Zen philosophy that it all is life comes across really clearly.
Thank you.
Yes.
I appreciate that. Essentially, the book is pretty simply organized in terms of the table of contents. The first section of the book, which starts with birds eating cherries from the very old tree, those poems I felt they were kind of the more questioning of the poems. I had just sort of the more maybe overt themes, the Zen themes, and the second section of the book, pretty much all the poems had to do with insects, and that section starts with Curator of Insects. The third section of the book, which starts with Lay Hold of Me, those were kind of all poems that related to family or home life, and then the last section, which is Here is the Pilgrim on the Waterless Shore, and then ends with which is a long sequenced poem, and then it ends with a short poem, which is a refrain, which is also kind of a refrain that runs throughout the poem. And one of the other things that I did in this book, which was important to me, was that I honored a lot of my poetry ancestors, or poets and writers that I imagined as my poetry ancestors. And so we visit Basho and Busan and Issa and Shea Sonigan, more contemporary Gertrude Stein.
Yes. Walt Whitman.
Harry Levitt, Walt Whitman. Neruda, and even Lydia Davis has a brief appearance. So
I did. I noticed that. It's fascinating that not only have you written these poems, but then there was some creativity, not some, but a lot of creativity into arranging them, which is, it works.
Oh, I'm so glad. Yeah, that was really difficult, actually.
I bet.
For me. I had some help from a good friend and a mentor in the arrangement of the poems, and then for some reason I couldn't see it in this book. I see it now, and just that with all of the poems kind of in one big pile, and I had some ideas of what should go together in the sequence, but it just, for some reason, like I said already, I just couldn't see it, and so he was able to kind of shape it a little bit for me, and then I was able to continue with that until I ended up with this final sequence, which took quite a while.
I can imagine. Well, the bigger poem that's in different sections you've dedicated to New Mexico. I like that.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, that meant a lot. And so why don't you take a minute and read something for us from this?
Okay. Why don't I read? I'll read a love poem.
Great.
And, that one's on page 32.
Okay.
It's called 14 Love Songs. What I was thinking about with this poem was, what do I mean when I say I love you? What do I really mean? And so that's kind of the premise of this poem. 14 Love Songs. Above a pond, I sit on a wooden bench and throw pebbles into the willows. A rush of sunlight and wind creates a path in a channel of water, dances between the melting ice and brown islands of bulrush. The resident osprey, its eyes the color of yellow grass, follows my tossing hand. Love is a diorama of inner life in an outer world. I look down and find a chunk of fossilized rock with an entire Paleozoic shell sticking out. I am not afraid of love, but terrified of how it is my steady guide. Once, when tired, I wandered off the trail and crawled under a tree to rest. I woke to a young brown bear licking my boot. Nothing had ever felt that good. When I say I love you, what I mean is I wouldn't leave you. Even if love is not love back, it doesn't go away, although it may become a black hole. Could this be what it's like for trees to lose the green from their leaves? At noon, the light shifts, and the pond turns into a mosaic of opaque green ice. Orange carp rise in these cold, watery chambers to breathe at the surface. Always I am in love, face to face with the sun, face to face with the moon.
Very nice.
Thank you.
Yeah, very visual. You use colors so well.
Oh, well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of colors, the painting on the front is very interesting.
My sister-in-law, Joanne Kaufman, is, I think, an amazing artist. And I was looking through some of her work, and I found that, and she was, thrilled for me to use it as the cover. So what it actually is roses, dried roses that were hanging in a closet.
Wow.
She painted them, and for me, it was kind of a real abstract image of that resonated with beauty and darkness and maybe a sort of a sense of, a background, a sort of a screen of apocalyptic,
Right.
feelings for our time. Although my poems aren't really very apocalyptic, but I think they have an essence of that. It's very nuanced.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Yeah, when you first see this, I didn't know it was roses until I read the attribution and the title of it, because it lends itself to so many thoughts.
Thank you.
Something I wanted to ask you about was the Wingspan Poetry Project.
Oh, uh-huh.
And you are the founder-director of that. What is that?
Yeah, the Wingspan Poetry Project, I founded that in 2013, and it's still going on. Well, not right now because everything is closed, but
right.
What we do is I started on my own, and I started working at the Esperanza Shelter for Battered Families in Santa Fe, and I visited weekly to a group of women. Whoever wanted to come was welcome. And we met and had a poetry class. I would bring some poems. We would read them, discuss them. Then I would offer a prompt, and they would write for 10, 15 minutes. Then they would read their work, and we would discuss it. I mean, basically, that's a general kind of workshop setup. Right. But it was not necessarily, not really at all, unless they asked for it, focused on craft. It was more focused on feelings and discussion and, a way to create intimacy between the different participants in the group, which was incredibly powerful. So the women would just come to a new level of knowing each other and form these closer bonds, which was beautiful to watch week to week. And generally, it's a very transient situation, the clients at a shelter like that, as you can imagine. And so it was difficult to kind of build a group, but week to week there was some sort of continuum where a woman or two from the week before would show up, and then, she would bring somebody new, and then that person would be the following week, and so on. So there was sort of this, essence of the people who had left. Mm-hmm. In the group, and then and it just seemed to work. Then shortly after I began, two other women poets joined the staff, and they started teaching too. So we were able to branch out, and we've taught in pretty much all the facilities in Santa Fe. We're currently working in two facilities at the St. Elizabeth Shelter, the men's shelter, and Casa Familia, which is the women and children's emergency shelter. And we've worked at youth shelters in Santa Fe. We've worked at other programs for St. Elizabeth, and we've worked not only at the Esperanza Shelter for Battered Families in their living facility, but we've worked also in their support center, which is a continuing sort of education and support and therapy for the survivors of domestic violence.
That's amazing. And there's some of the poetry is published on the website Wingspan Poetry Project.
Yes, wingspanpoetryproject.wordpress.com, and we maintain a blog and post the poems that come out of the class if they're given to us, and they're all posted anonymously to protect the identity of the writer. And also we have a lot of other information about the teachers and about what we do on that website. We've also been supported from the Witterbinner Foundation for Poetry for 4 consecutive years. They've issued us 4 grants to fund our project, which is a big help and a big honor.
Absolutely.
And we're incredibly grateful to them for that.
And some of those poems are really poignant.
Oh, yeah. It's really amazing work. I'm so grateful that I've been able to do it and to have the teachers. I mean, now we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I think 5 teachers. Not everybody's teaching at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah, I was really interested in that. That sounds like a really helpful thing to do for some of these women that are in these situations, and youth also. Yeah.
We did have, sometimes women would bring their children, and then, if it was me teaching, I would adjust whatever I had. I usually had some haiku or a poem, in my files that was appropriate for a child, and so then we would just switch gears a little bit. But we never turned anybody away, so if a kid wanted to come, that was fine.
Would you
Thank you.
Read another poem for us?
Sure. Well, why don't I read that short one that you want, and then I'll read something else.
Okay.
Tracy, so I'll read this one for you since you liked it.
Okay.
It's called For Most of a Life. And it's a very short poem. For most of a life, everything narrows at the neck, the infinite motion of a figure 8, an old-fashioned glass egg timer, the shifting through of what is clearly uncertain. Often my breath gets stuck right there. I place a hand over my heart and pull down, pressing the ribs at the top of my chest to let the clutter out.
I really love that one. As a graduate of Naropa, we learned that breathing.
Mm-hmm.
And in these times, especially with so much anxiety and so much focus on the lungs, this really spoke to me about.
Oh, that's great.
Take the
Thank
full,
you. I love that.
Yeah.
I was just thinking too when I read it that it's pretty timely.
It is timely.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Let the clutter out. Very good. Yeah, and you have another one picked out for us to read?
Sure. Then I read this one called Osprey.
Oh, yeah, I like that one too.
Oh, good. Osprey. This morning, waking from long, voluptuous sleep, I felt my life warm to this warming world, and then fall away. The ledge not crumbled beneath me, but pulled back as I stood at its edge. Like that tablecloth trick, where the settings remain in place, all my pieces intact, as I fell through the pine tops, my mind loosening its language, the first to salute the velocity. With my feet still on the granite, I look up to see an osprey flying just overhead, a trout secure in its talons, the fish's tail swimming through the wind. I saw the yellow glint of its scales, the flesh torn from a struggle. Then, as if magic, a drop of cool blood in my hair.
So many of these poems are on the beach near the water, which there isn't a lot of that in Santa Fe.
Yeah, there's a few. I think there's just a few. And I have spent some time in Miami Beach over the last few years in the winter, a few months. And so that's where those come from. I always know where to put my hands on a tree.
Right.
Is one of them, and Which Yellow Bird, and let's see, the island of Koshima, but that didn't take place. But yeah, most of these poems really do have the setting of New Mexico.
They do.
So, but those beachy ones, that's.
So, in one of your poems, you talk about writing poetry and how you don't really write poetry just sitting down, but in walking through nature.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was the one in the multitasking.
In Common Octopus?
Yeah, right, Common Octopus. And I found that interesting. Yeah. So, do you wait for poetry to come to you? Do you go out and seek it? And if you find it, do you always have a pen and paper with you, or how do you do that?
Well, that's a great question, and I would say yes to everything. I think I don't have any particular process or say one thing has to happen over another. I kind of I'm not really sure every day what will happen in terms of a poem. And some days I sit down and I spend maybe even a whole day, maybe 8 hours, looking at poems and working on poems. And then maybe some days I'll spend several hours and then I'll go out and I'll see, like in that poem, what I find. And maybe that will happen sort of intuitively, sort of serendipitously, that it fits in a poem that I'm working on, or I think, oh gosh, that's how I can finish that poem. So I think it's really mysterious what happens. I think the reliable things are sitting down and doing the work. You can always do that and depend on that. For me, I know that as long as I sit and do the work, which feels like a practice to me,
right.
Something will eventually happen, and it might not happen even that week. It might happen in a month, but it's just a matter of not being discouraged and staying with it and just staying open to seeing, the possibilities and just waiting for that surprise of what will happen.
Right. Like, as you mentioned, and as I saw in here, there are so many references and honorariums to the other poets. So you read other poetry constantly, right?
I do, yeah.
Yeah. And that informs you. But you don't read just poetry. I loved the poem that was complimentary of Gertrude Stein.
Oh,
That was great.
Yeah, well, Gertrude Stein also was a poet, right?
She was,
so
yes.
She wrote lots of different forms. And Lydia Davis also,
right.
My poem, The Cows, and that's from a short story or a microfiction, maybe even of hers. But she also writes poetry. Yeah.
So letting those poets inform your writing, I think that's... And even Walking with Isso, right? Issa?
Yeah, with Issa and Basho.
And Basho, right.
Yeah, definitely. I think of, especially Basho, I felt like that for years I just sort of thought of him as a mentor and a companion, although, of course, that would be impossible. But just from his work and his sensibility and the kind of the experience of reading his work and how it opened me, that I just think of him as a teacher. And so I could read one of those if you like. I wrote, there's 2 poems in this book that are for Basho, or honor him as an ancient.
Yes.
For me, as kind of my first poetry ancestor. That's kind of how I think about Basho.
Oh, I like that. Yeah, I'd love to hear one of those.
Yeah, and then Busan, Busan, who never met Basho, lived maybe 70 years or 100 years after Basho had died, or was born 100 years, something like that, after
right.
Basho had died. But Basho was very popular then in Japan, and he was revered from then on by all of the haiku poets and of course others. And so Busan continued in Basho's tradition, and then Basho and Issa, they did know each other. Oh. And Issa also continued in that tradition. And so when we think of the 3 ancient haiku poets, those are the 3, although there are others.
Yes.
But anyway, that's where that comes from.
Very
so
good.
Let me, would you like me to, I'll read the Dear Basho, one of the Basho poems. And this one is just simply, it's an epistle, which is a letter poem, and it's titled Dear Basho.
Great.
Dear Basho, thank you for sending me your new poems. I have a question, but first I want to tell you, I traveled north by bus the other day to watch the Pueblo dances, and there was a man on a high pole. He had a dead lamb with him, whose neck had been slit. The pole was 100 feet in the air, and he leapt and twirled on a small platform, which wobbled with his movement. You would have liked to seen his body, covered in sweat, shimmering in the sun like 1,000 yellow leaves. That night I dreamt I was in a park of tall, leafy trees in various shades of autumn. I had a baby boy in a backpack slung from my shoulders, when out of nowhere appeared an enormous snake, and in one wide bite it ate the baby off my back. I woke with the morning light, sweat pooling in the hollow between my collarbones. Basho, what is the world if it is not this uneasy face, puddling and drying as we thrust ourselves toward the sky? You have been dead over 300 years, but I feel you, Basho, the length of your back, its weight across pine when you lie down, your knobby right hand, a stylus between your fingers. I feel the way you feel yourself, so many brown and silvering leaves, each atop or underneath another.
I love that. Really channeling him. Yes, very nice. I should mention your website, elizabethjacobson.wordpress.com.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, I don't really keep that up as well as I could.
Okay.
I would just mention that, again, the title of the book is Not Into the Blossoms and Not Into the Air, and it's available in Santa Fe from Collected Works, and it's, of course, available online from the press, which is parlorpress.com, and also, of course, is available from Amazon and other small press distributors if anybody is interested in purchasing it.
And our local independent bookstore will take orders if requested.
Oh, that's wonderful.
Yes.
What's the name of that book?
Amy's Bookcase. It's really worth having in print form, I think, because of the beauty of the cover, etc. So, well, thank you very much for talking with me.
Oh, Tracy, it's a pleasure, and thank you for your interest and for reaching out and for reading my book.
Oh, absolutely. And that was Elizabeth Jacobson, the Poet Laureate of Santa Fe, New Mexico. This is Tracy Hales-Vass with Right on Four Corners on KSJE 90.9 FM in Farmington, New Mexico.